The time is now 5:30 and a quorum is present. So I will call this meeting of the Madison Plan Commission of November 24th, 2022 to order. First, we'll get some news from our technical facilitator.
Okay, welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, if you are able, please activate your video for purposes of quorum and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Also, please continue to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized. To speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote, lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the council or committee, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Mayor or Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ariana.
Yes, you're welcome.
Okay. Communications, disclosures, and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Are there any disclosures or recusals? Seeing no raised hands. Next is public comment. And agenda item 1, I don't believe we have any public comment. Is that correct, Heather? Okay, very good. Next is minutes of November 7th. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing no raised hands, is there a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. And I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Schedule of upcoming meetings. We do have a regular meeting on December 12th and January 9th and January 23rd, all at 5:30. We also have a special meeting on December 8th. That will be at 5 p.m. The regular meetings will be via Zoom. The special meeting will be in room 215 of the Madison Municipal Building. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. It is the custom of the Plan Commission to remove from the agenda those items on which the staff believes an application has had sufficient review to warrant approval with all of the conditions placed upon it by various city departments, and on which the applicant accepts those conditions, and there are no individuals who have registered to speak in opposition to the item. These items are placed on the consent agenda, and we will address them at the beginning of our meeting. Then people who are interested in those items can sign off if they would like to, unless a member of the Plan Commission requests separation, in which case the item is removed from the consent agenda and taken in the regular course of business. Of the items before us today, the following are proposed for the consent agenda. And we do include referrals as well as items that are to be placed on file. So the first items are agenda items 6, 7, and 8. Those are to be referred to December 12th at the request of the applicant. Agenda items 9, 10, and 11 also to be referred to December 12th at the request of the applicant. Agenda item 14, agenda item 15 to be placed on file without prejudice. Agenda item 16, agenda item 17, agenda item 18 to be placed on file at the request of the applicant, agenda item 19, 20, and 21. Are there any requests for separation from commissioners? Seeing no raised hands, I'll read the items which are on the consent agenda into the record. And again, agenda items 6 through 8 are to be referred to the December 12th meeting at the request of the applicant. Agenda item 6, Legistar 74054, agenda item 7, Legistar 74426, agenda item 8, Legistar 74055. Agenda items 9, 10, and 11 also to be referred to December 12th. Agenda item 9 is Legistar 74065. Agenda item 10 is Legistar 74056. Agenda item 11, Legistar 74721. On the consent agenda, agenda item 14, Legistar 71634, located at 917 Deming Way, 9th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a street-facing wall of an office industrial building to allow construction of an addition. And then to be placed on file without prejudice, agenda item 15, Legistar 73360. On the consent agenda, agenda item 16, Legistar 74310, creating sections of the Madison General Ordinances to change the zoning of property located at 432 South Junction Road, 1st Alder District, from agricultural district to suburban employment district. And on the consent agenda, agenda item 17, Legistar 74059, located at 668 State Street, 8th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the downtown core district for an addition to a building greater than 20,000 square feet and that has more than 4 stories to allow construction of a 4-story addition to an existing 2-story commercial building. Agenda item 18, Legistar 74253, to be placed on file without prejudice at the request of the applicant. Agenda item 19, Legistar 75254, located at 255 North Sherman Avenue, 12th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the neighborhood mixed use district for a restaurant nightclub and consideration of a conditional use in the NMX district for an outdoor eating area to allow a portion of a commercial building to be converted into a restaurant nightclub with outdoor eating area. Also on the consent agenda, agenda item 20, Legistar 74255, located at 3010 Crossroads Drive, 17th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the commercial center district for a restaurant nightclub to allow a restaurant tavern to be converted into a restaurant nightclub. Agenda item 21, Legistar 74256, located at 5050 Lake Mendota Drive, 19th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use to construct an accessory building on a lakefront property. I will open the public hearing. No registrants to speak. I'll close the public hearing. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. And I will assume unanimous. I see Alder Heck has his hand raised. Alder Heck?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to note that item number 17 is in the 2nd Alder District, not the 8th. That was all I had. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Okay. And with that, I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the consent agenda passes unanimously. Okay, going back to the other items on our agenda. The first one we will consider is agenda item 2, Legistar 74423, creating section 16.03, establishing a transportation demand management program and amending 33.56 paren 5 of the Madison General Ordinances. And I understand that Madison Department of Transportation member Philip Gritzmacher is available to give us an overview, and Tom Lynch, Director of the department, is here to answer questions. Philip Gritzmacher, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to give a brief presentation. This presentation was included within your within the agenda packet. We've added a couple of slides as well to address some of the feedback from stakeholders. So I will go over those as well at the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned, my name is Philip Gritzmacher. I'm a planner within the Department of Transportation, and I'm here to talk with you about the Transportation Demand Management Program. And I appreciate the time. The very first place that we're going to start out is what TDM actually is. And it's a package of policies and strategies that's designed to improve the efficiency of the transportation network and shift people away from driving by themselves to other modes of transportation. And that's not to eliminate driving or to make it impossible to drive, but it's to provide options, to give people the ability to get around using multiple modes of transportation. And this is really important, especially right now, because if we take a look, what's happening is people are driving twice as much as they were back in 1970. Vehicular miles traveled, or VMT, is dramatically outpacing population growth. And I know that this chart ends in 2019, but after the pandemic, we've seen VMT return to pre-pandemic levels. So that has some consequences. Locally, what that means is that some of our most important transportation corridors are at capacity with limited options for expansion. And even if we could expand those, we might not want to, because it would have pretty dire consequences on pedestrians, cyclists, transit users, and just the overall vibrancy of the community in general. And then there are climate concerns. We know that if we keep doing what we've been doing, we have some of the most dramatic impacts of climate change. And that's a global problem, but locally it's a problem as well. This map shows the average annual precipitation in the last 30 years compared to the 20th century. And you'll notice that there's a little dark spot over Madison. And what that means is that on average, we're receiving more than 4 inches of precipitation more than we were in the 20th century. And that has consequences. It's not coming evenly. In 2018, for instance, we had flooding all the way across the community. And this is one of the reasons why TDM is so important, because transportation is the largest contributing sector of emissions in our economy. And it's one that we have the ability to influence at the city level. And the way that we do that is by changing our methods of facilitating growth. So traditionally, when we have a new development, we increase the size of our transportation network to accommodate the trips that would be generated from that new development. And with TDM, we flip that on its head. What we do is we shrink the number of trips that development is producing to fit our transportation network. You might wonder how we do this. And it's really getting people out of their cars into other modes of transportation. This is a fun graphic. So what it's showing is 200 people in their cars, 200 people in 177 cars. And what you see is these cars stretch across 5 lanes as far as the eye can see, about 3 blocks back. And if you get them out of their cars and into a bus, you can fit all those people on 3 buses in 1 lane. And that's how we are able to do this. We get people out of their cars and in other modes of transportation. So how that we would do this is again, walking, biking, transit, carpooling. Right now, the city has a pretty good mode share, truthfully. 2/3 of people in the city drive alone, which nationally is pretty good, but we think we can do better. So on the left is our current mode shared, and the right is kind of an example of what we would want it to be. So what we could do is have fewer people driving, not eliminating driving, but having fewer people driving to get to their destinations, and encouraging people to use other modes of transportation. And that gets into our TDM programs effective. And national research does show that TDM programs are effective, and they can reduce VMT by the following percentages that are showed in here. And ordinances is one of the things that is most effective. Obviously, land use as well. Getting efficient land use is always a good thing. And we would be far from the first city implementing TDM. It's been implemented across the country. This is just a real quick skim to see other communities that have implemented TDM. And La Crosse, Wisconsin, actually is one of the cities that back in 2018 implemented a TDM program. And if they can do it, we can do it here as well. And then at the bottom right, there's some asterisks because that's the UW-Madison. They've had a very successful TDM program for a number of years. So there are over 22,000 employees in the community that are subject to TDM requirements already. TDM is also aligned with many city plans and strategies. It's in the comprehensive plan. It's in the transportation plan for the city. It's in the mayor's sustainability vision, and it's already all throughout our land use regulations, the conditional uses, plan development districts, employment districts, mixed use center districts, and big box districts. And it's been in our ordinances for over 20 years. The problem is that the application of this has been uneven, and it leads to a situation where developers are unsure of how much TDM is required, and the Plan Commission and Council have struggled to determine how much TDM is warrants approval, which I'm sure that all of you have been a part of one of these processes. And that can lead to some prolonged discussions, and it creates an environment of uncertainty that is bad for all that participate in that process. An example is Madison Yards, which took 7 meetings to get approved. One of the meetings is over an hour long. It actually came to this body 3 times, council 3 times, and TPPB 1 time. So with our proposed program, these meetings would be replaced with interactions with staff and a spreadsheet that is predictable and easy to fill out, and hopefully would make the program much easier to participate in. And we'll get into that spreadsheet in a little bit. So getting to our program, we looked at successful TDM programs across the country and tried to choose some of the best elements of each of those. Programs that are old, like the Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Arlington, Virginia program, and even some that are really new, such as the one in Denver. We wanted to choose all the best elements of those programs and wrap them up into our program. And our process is pretty simple. Number one, you determine the applicability of TDM to your project, determine the requirements if it is applicable to you. You create and submit a TDM plan, and then you would implement the TDM measures and report out and recertify biannually. And most of this would happen within a spreadsheet that we've created. You'd be able to input the characteristics of your property. That would tell you if it would determine for you whether there's TDM requirements, and you would submit that spreadsheet as your TDM plan. And I'll show that again in just a moment. There are numerous factors that determine the TDM requirements. The land use has a significant impact on that. Certain land uses will generate more trips. The size of the development, the larger the development, the more trips it could generate. The proposed parking, the higher the parking ratio, the higher the TDM requirement. There are studies that have demonstrated that the more free parking is available, the more people are willing to drive. So that's one of the reasons that's one of the factors. And then the location. We provide base points for locating within certain transit service areas. And with the help of the developers, we devised a modifier system to change the point values based on the location of a project. And then we've developed a number of measures that a developer could choose from, 42 in all. Each measure has a point value from 1 to 10, and the value is based upon the efficacy in reducing VMT, documented best practices, the cost of the measure itself, and then the relevance for Madison. And certain measures, such as transit, car share, and bike share, actually have modifiers so that if a development is not located within the service area of those measures, they would only be worth half of the number of points. And then I mentioned that we have developed a modifier system. So this came at the request of the development community. Basically, the way this would work is you would generate a base TDM score. And depending on where you're located within the city, the score would be reduced by a certain amount. So in the downtown area, where many TDM requirements will be met by virtue of locating within a dense urban environment with access to multiple modes of transportation and likely with unbundled parking, you'd have to meet 100% of the TDM requirement, but it would be easier to meet. And the further out that you get, the lower the overall score would be, but the score is lowered in an acknowledgement that it's more challenging to meet TDM requirements in suburban areas, for instance. And this is something that came out of our meetings with the developers. And then we also provide base points for transit. So I talked about locating the downtown being an opportunity to have access to transportation. This is where that's rewarded. So in the BRT service area, you get 5 points, all day service area, 3 in the peak only, 1 point. And then outside of there, no points for transit. This map is draft. This will be updated to reflect the new network redesign before the program goes into effect. And then we've created a tool to try to make the process as easy as possible. So to use the tool, you would basically enter the characteristics of your property, where it's located, the land use, the amount of parking, and that would tell you whether or not you need to have TDM, whether you have a TDM mitigation requirement at all or not. If you do have one, you go onto the second page and it would give you your total number of points that you need to meet, and it would give you those menu of TDM options. And you would select the boxes, and it would tell you when you are in compliance. You would save this and submit this to the Department of Transportation, and that would be certifying that you're meeting TDM requirements for the city. And this program would operate within the Acela environment, so it would happen in concurrence with existing development practices. There are a few considerations. This program would go into effect 6 months after the approval of the program. So if it were to go into if it were to be approved next month, it would go into effect in May, and it wouldn't impact existing properties until they expand parking, expand their use, change their use, or redevelop. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about the modifications that we've made to the program. So I know that many of you have seen this already. We've made approximately 40 modifications to the program due to stakeholder and developer feedback. And in general, Department of Transportation staff feels that this has made the program better. It's more easy to implement, more feasible, and we think it reduces the administrative burden on all parties. So it's in general kind of a win-win. So some of these modifications that we made, I talked extensively about this, but we have the modifier system. Initially, we had a heavy reliance on walk scores, which we were told could have a negative impact on catalytic projects. So we've reduced we eliminated the walk score from the equation at all. We've streamlined a number of measures to make them easier to implement and less complex. And we've more closely aligned the point values to coincide with the cost to implement measures. We've also developed procedures for multi-use sites, such as the mall, so that it's not bringing the entire site into compliance, but the portion that would actually be redeveloping. And then we've added an appeals process, a point reduction process. So this is a process where at the staff level, if an existing property was brought into the program and it were infeasible to actually implement the full TDM point requirement, they could request a point reduction at the staff level. And infeasible means that due to spatial constraints or financial reasons, they wouldn't be able to meet that. Up to 5 points could be reduced at the staff level, and that could be appealed to the Transportation Commission if additional mitigation were required. We've also clarified a number of definitions at the request of the developers and split some measures, such as we had showers and clothes lockers being one measure. We've separated those in half, effectively doubling the point value, but ensuring that someone could implement just half of that measure and still receive credit. We've also moved the certification from being annual to biannual. We've added additional outreach meetings with some stakeholder groups and individual stakeholders, and added a report out period. 6 months after this is implemented, we would reach out to those participating in the program to gather their feedback and potentially make modifications at the Transportation Commission if they're warranted. And then I mentioned that I added a few slides with the help of Tom to address some of the concerns that we heard in the emails that are circulated and the attachments to the item. First is that TDM would only have a modest impact because Madison residents live outside the city, and a majority of the employees that work in Madison are commuters. And to that, again, TDM is not meant to shift everyone's mode of transportation. So if 50% of the people in Madison work within the community and we could get a portion of those folks take another form of transportation, that's a win from our perspective for TDM. And it's also important to acknowledge that as a community and really regionally with our partners, we've been making significant investments in transit. So BRT is not going to just be a Madison thing. It's going to have local tentacles that go to Sun Prairie and Middleton, and eventually the north-south line could go to Fitchburg as well. And the network redesign is bringing fast and frequent transit throughout the entire community. And we've been collaborating with communities such as Sun Prairie and Monona that have not been in the system to bring them in. So it's not just that. So we've been making these investments, and TDM is an opportunity to leverage those investments as well. We've also heard that TDM could encourage owners to charge separately for parking, and that could present a hardship for single parents. I think it's important to acknowledge that there are 42 measures in the program, and only 3 of those are parking measures. They're not required. You could certainly meet the requirements without implementing the parking measures. That said, an applicant could provide a transportation allowance that pays for parking or allows an employee to, for instance, buy a bus pass or repair their bicycle, whatever they want to do from a transportation standpoint. That would meet the 10-point requirement. So there are a number of ways to get there. But like I said, it's possible to meet TDM requirements without parking policies. And the reason why they're so valuable is because they've been shown to be very effective, and we know that they can be challenging in certain contexts to implement. And really, from our standpoint, I think it's important to acknowledge that not all employees have free parking. Some employees don't have free parking, and they don't have transportation options offered to them. And TDM might be the rationale and the reason why transportation options are offered to them, such as bus passes, bike racks, things of that nature. So it could be a win for employees as well. Next, we heard that multi-use employment or commercial buildings are unable to meet TDM requirements, and the examples in the downtown were infeasible. And from our perspective, new properties are already in the TDM program. They're already subject to TDM requirements that are in the ordinance. We mentioned that they've been in effect for 20 years at this point, over 20 years. In some cases, the TDM program, the new one, would present fewer requirements, and they would be more predictable, and the approval process would be significantly easier. And in other cases, one of the reasons why it might be easier in a multi-tenant building than a single tenant building is you can share measures. So imagine installing a shower that all employees have access to, or a bike storage room that all employees in a building have access to. Those points could be shared amongst all users, and that sort of thing would be easiest to implement when a building is brand new. And then there are other things that a new building would receive points for, such as shared parking or adding to the land use mix if there were multiple uses within a building. So again, we think in a new building, it's actually easier than in an existing building. And in the downtown area, it's probably the easiest in the entire community. We've tested multiple projects to make sure that this is feasible, including some projects that the developers submitted to us. And we've also used it on our own project, the Village on Park Street. Each phase, it's a 4-phase project. One of the phases is actually building a parking structure. That's the only thing that's happening. And we've ensured that it's possible to meet the requirements in a variety of different ways. So this is something that we are holding ourselves to the standard as well, and we believe that it is certainly possible. Next is that most tenants will refuse to take responsibility for TDM or will require a rental reduction, and owners will not want to shift responsibility to tenants due to potential fines. This is something that we heard early on, and as a result, we've marked measures as infrastructure or programmatic. Infrastructure measures being those that a bike rack or something of that nature that the owner could install in the building to meet requirements. Programmatic being things such as providing bus passes to employees. I think it's important to acknowledge that many employers are already offering commuter benefits as perks, and that would be 10 points. So if that's already occurring, that would be something that the owners would be able to take advantage of. And in some cases, the tenants are already responsible for meeting certain city ordinances. Think of things such as landscaping requirements, mowing lawns, being passed along to tenants. So it's not completely abnormal to see this happen. The same thing can happen with building requirements when structures are modified. In some cases, that is the tenant's responsibility to interact with the city on behalf of those issues. Next is it would be challenging to comply with TDM requirements in a suburban environment. And again, we've actually created that system of point reductions in the suburban area to make it easier to meet point requirements. And we've tested multiple projects It will require a shift in mindset, and we'll have to implement some things in a suburban context that maybe haven't been done right now, but that's how we're able to meet our climate goals and reduce VMT. And again, for the existing properties, we've added that appeals process if it's infeasible to implement the full range of measures. And then the last comment before we get to the proposed changes is that the TDM program would apply to tenant spaces constructed before the ordinance is enacted, and that is true. Like I mentioned, that would happen as sites redevelop, they're expanded, parking is expanded, or uses turn over. One of the things that was suggested is that maybe at the sub-use level, that wouldn't trigger inclusion in the program. But I think it's important to recognize that the reason why the sub-uses was chosen as the triggering area, a sub-use being a primary use would be employment versus commercial. And within commercial, for instance, there are a number of sub-uses. So retail, coffee shops, restaurants, those are all sub-uses, and they all have significantly different trip generation rates. So if you were to have a retail shop that would convert to a coffee shop, the demands in the transportation network would be significantly higher for that coffee shop than a general retail establishment. So that's why we think that that is the most appropriate place. And at the sub-use level for employment, for instance, it covers a wide variety of things, everything from laboratories to light industrial to office spaces. We have added that point reduction process as well to help mitigate some of that. And it's also important to acknowledge that many uses are exempt from the program entirely. So employment uses under 10,000 square feet and commercial uses under 40,000 are not subject to TDM requirements. So many of the smaller uses within the city would not participate in the program at all. And then the last couple of slides, we wanted to respond to the proposed changes in the program. So adding the sunset provision, I think it's important to acknowledge that the TDM requirements are already found in the ordinance. So sunsetting would not roll back the TDM requirements, but only the program. And we would be back in the environment of uncertainty that we're in right now. And in the time that the program would be enacted, we'd have an environment of uncertainty as well. So that would kind of defeat the purpose of the program entirely. And the other concern is that the program would rely on revenues from participants in the program to hire staff. So if the program were to be sunsetted, that would jeopardize that concept. The second proposed change is removing TDM program applicability to existing properties. And again, that would create that two-tier system of properties, potentially discourage redevelopment and reinvestment in existing properties, and would dramatically reduce the effectiveness of the TDM program over time. Day one, there's not going to be a change in those properties, but as uses turn over, more properties will be brought into the program. And if this were to be the case, we would see many properties not come into the program for many years. And this would have a direct impact on our goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing VMT. And then final two, modifying, there was a request to modify the unbundling parking measure to allow for uncontrolled free surface lots. And in staff's opinion, this would completely eliminate the effectiveness of the measure. So unbundling parking basically allows a user for an apartment, for instance, to unbundle parking from rents. So if free parking were available in addition to being able to unbundle parking, it would still provide that option to park at the site for free. So this could be submitted as another unique measure, which is something that we have in the program. So you're able to create your own measure and submit that with a recommended point value, and that could be approved at the Transportation Commission. And if it's submitted multiple times, it could certainly be included in the program. Our intention is to go to Transportation Commission annually to review the measures, change point values, and add new measures. And then finally, the request was the double point value for certain low value TDM measures. And going through the list of measures that were presented were some of the lowest impact, which is one of the reasons why staff doesn't support this. We worked with the stakeholders to already modify many of the measures that were in that list of measures to make them easier to implement, removing some of the specific requirements to make them more general so that they're easier to implement, and certain properties would already meet those requirements. And it's also important to acknowledge that in some of the areas where this is most desired, in the suburban areas, we're already effectively doubling the value of these with the modifier system. So by doubling the value again, you're basically providing 4 times the value, which would significantly reduce the value of the program. And it would make it possible in many cases to meet TDM requirements without some of the more impactful measures. With that, this is the timeline that we currently have. We're at Plan Commission right now, obviously, and this would go to Sustainability Committee on the 28th, Transportation Commission on the 30th, TPPB on the 5th, and it would be considered at Council on the 6th. And with that, I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Philip. First, before questions, we will go to our registrants. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Craig Stanley, University Avenue, Madison, neither support nor opposed and wishing to speak. Craig, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Craig Stanley. I'm a commercial real estate broker. Our company works pretty exclusively with tenants on the office, life science, and industrial side. I'm going to speak mostly on the industrial side. On the office side. One of the big, I totally understand the constriction of trips and the ultimate goal. I think when I look at this from a tenant's perspective, I struggle with some of the ways in which the policy is, and I struggle. The way I describe it is, while the goal is to stop a river over here, which is the number of trips, it seems like we're trying to dam a river 2 rivers over, and I'm questioning the effectiveness. It's hard for me. I have a real hard time struggling with whether the policy will be effective or not. And that's my perspective on it, because I almost look at it as, at the end of the day, if the landlords are not going to be able to accomplish the TDM as set out, they're ultimately going to pass through that cost through, and it's ultimately going to be a tax on it. And one of the things we do with our clients is doing employee scatter maps and seeing where employees are coming from. And employees make decisions on where they live for a lot of reasons. And I think in order to really accomplish what we're trying to do, we should focus more on incentive development and infill development that would allow greater corridors. I know that's what BRT is trying to accomplish, but I would double down on that versus some of the suburban sites that I think are just naturally never going to be able to accomplish the TDM goals. That's sort of my high level outline. Happy to answer any questions relative to my thoughts.
Thank you, Craig. We will come back to questions after all the registrants have spoken. The next registrant is Kathy O'Donnell, 8040 Excelsior Drive, Madison, neither support nor opposed and wishing to speak. Kathy, you have 3 minutes. Tech facilitator, is Kathy unmuted?
There we go.
Okay, good. Kathy,
right.
you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Kathy O'Donnell. I work for a developer in Madison, and this evening I'm speaking on several developers. We've worked really hard, and I want to say thank you to Philip for working for us with the transportation department over the past year, trying to work on various questions and issues and concerns, bringing them up to speed on, what these challenges are for locations and costs. And I think we really accomplished some changes and improvements to the TDM program through that process. And I'm hopeful we can continue to address a few other items that we still feel are rather critical. We had discussed uses and sub-use categories a lot, and we thought that some of the sub-use categories don't change the amount of drivers, doesn't change how the space was used, and it really wouldn't be applicable to, you're not accomplishing anything, but it appears this is all sub-use categories now, and we'd still like to kind of discuss that if possible. Timing is a real concern for us as we face new challenges with not only finding new tenants, but working to keep the ones we currently have. There is a huge shift occurring right now in office use. Hybrid and work from home, many businesses are moving out of buildings and out of Madison or downsizing. And decisions are made extremely quickly right now. Take forever to make the decision, but when it's made, it goes fast. Last week, I was given 48 hours to draft a lease, and I have 4 weeks to get a tenant moved in. If this was one that I needed to go for, I can't meet all the points. I just can't get there. I need to get, some points reduced. I have a real fear of what timing is, how long that timing is going to take and what that process is going to be. The inclusion of the word impossible in the standard which Transportation Department staff will use, and I believe the word impossible is in the ordinance. I haven't seen it in the program to grant a reduction in TDM. It really worries me that rarely would be granted, or what's the interpretation of that word impossible? What's that going to mean? We would like to discuss that further. Like I said, Philip has been great working with us on these things. Many of the TDM measures have involved physical improvements to building sites. Some are impossible, some are impractical, some can be done. When we can't achieve those, we actually went through and we provided a lot of the information. What building can achieve them, what buildings can't, what are we short, how do we get there? We can't relocate our building to be near transit or shared transportation in many cases. And we don't have the right to make the decision to bring zip car, B-cycle, parking ramps, bus routes closer to us. So it's really challenging when you hit the wall on those that you can't get enough points to do. We have another concern about federal, city, and state leases can't be amended to force a tenant to partake in the achievement of these points, while we have the right to in leases.
Thank you, Kathy. That does conclude your available 3 minutes.
Thank you.
The next registrant is Vic Villacruz, 122 West Washington Avenue, Madison, neither support nor opposed and wishing to speak. Vic, you have 3 minutes.
There you go. Thank you. My name is Vic Villacruz. I work for a downtown developer. I just want to take the opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and tonight. Just wanted to give kind of some more insight. You've heard a little bit on how the program will impact leasing on commercial spaces. I deal with leases every day, and basically, lease is a contract between two parties for space. Common area amenities and building services, and location of the building, or building could be on in downtown or on the periphery. But beyond that, the use restrictions and clauses stating not to do anything immoral or break the law. We normally don't see a lot of requirements in the lease mandating tenants, employees to perform outside the operational procedures of the company. There is a shift going on. I rarely see and have contact with employees in dealing in my tenant relations. That's how far removed landlord-tenant-employee relations are, and it's even less now. Now that since COVID, so I just want to kind of give it more anecdotal information. I just heard from one of our brokers this morning. I asked, he was telling us about a major Fortune 500 IT company that was looking to office in downtown and looking for around 4,500 square feet. We had a lease. We thought we had, a shared deal. That was last spring. So I just asked him, hey, whatever happened to XYZ company? I thought for sure we had them. I thought maybe we lost them to the west side or east side. But the broker said the company decided to go completely remote. That's pretty much the cause of almost all the office tenants and their downsizing. Heard this so often that I believe that it is a paradigm shift. So we got competing shifts in the marketplace right now, and how firms operate and office, and this does affect their site selection. The surrounding municipalities, they understand this. They will again be presented with an undeniable dominant strategy not to enact these ordinances, which will allow them to attract employers, because the office scene in Middleton or Monona, for example, will be more cost effective. Of course, this is a valid argument for regional transportation demand management. So there is two different forces going on right now. External demand for office coming into Madison.
Thank you, Vic. That concludes your available 3 minutes.
Thank you.
The next registrant is Bill Connors, 25 West Main Street, Madison, neither support nor opposed, and wishing to speak, representing Smart Growth Greater Madison. Bill, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I hope you will ask me many questions because 3 minutes is far too short a time to address a complex new program like this. First, I want to thank Philip Gritzmacher and the members of Smart Growth for spending countless hours developing a shared understanding of how the proposed new program is supposed to work, sharing concerns and attempting to address those concerns to make this a better, more effective program. We are thankful for the changes that have been made thus far, but there are more concerns that have not been addressed. We still do not know the amount of the fee that must be paid with each TDM plan. The fee is per TDM plan, not per building, and some mixed-use buildings will require several TDM plans. Philip said during his presentation that this program does not require building owners to charge for parking. However, if a building owner developer cannot get one of those 10-point TDM mitigation measures, it will be extremely challenging to comply with the program. They either need to do the unbundling or charge for parking, or they need to do one of the 10-point measures that requires the commercial tenant, not the building owner, but the commercial tenant, to implement the program for the commercial tenant's employees. And in a lot of cases, in many cases, that is just not going to be feasible. And so you can't get the 10 points, so you can't comply with the program. Earlier, I emailed you changes that Smart Growth is requesting to the proposed new TDM program. First, we request requiring a report providing information about the effect of the program after it has been enforced for at least 3 years, so policymakers and the public understand the positive and negative impacts of the program. In the version I emailed to you, I inadvertently left out gathering input from employees who work in the buildings subject to the new TDM program, and I urge you to add that requirement to the components of the report. There's good reason to believe that this isn't going to have much of a beneficial impact, and so it ought to be reviewed by the council at some point in time. I suggested 4 years. That's the reason for the sunset. The application of the new program to existing buildings remains a great concern. Changes in use are adequately addressed by the provision in the program that would make the new program apply if the overall composition of uses in the site changes, including changes in use and particularly changes in subuse as additional triggers, is unfair and likely to make it extremely challenging to replace commercial tenants who leave existing buildings while at the same time complying with the new TDM program. The appeals processes were added because city staff recognized this will be a problem, but the appeals processes do not fix this problem. In new apartment buildings outside the downtown area, trying to push development.
Thank you, Bill. That concludes your available 3 minutes. We have several other registrants, but none of the rest of them are wishing to speak. So I will go to questions. Do commissioners have questions of any of our registrants? Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Mayor Zellers. Quick promotion there. I think I'll direct this to Bill Connors. Excuse me. And I'm very interested in the difficulties of placing requirements on owners that then have to be in turn transferred to operators, the people leasing the property. Could you say a little bit more about particularly the unbundled parking? Why would it be difficult for the developer to transfer that requirement to a tenant? Does that make sense?
Yes, Commissioner Fernandez, that makes sense. Good question. So the unbundled parking actually is one that can be directly implemented by the building owner. They can have gates. They can, in the downtown, we have an underground parking structure. There are gates there to charge people to be able to come in and out. So that one, even if you're leasing all the space in the building owner actually can implement that one. But the issue is that the commercial tenants, let's say you got a new office building and you're trying to get commercial tenants to lease up large parts of that building. Those large tenants very frequently, if the building owner goes to them and developer goes to them and says, we want the, I'm sorry, I gotta make that thing stop. We want everybody in the building to pay for parking. The tenant the potential tenant, they aren't even signed yet to a lease, will say, oh, no, I don't want my employees to have to pay for parking. If they have to pay for parking downtown, we don't want to locate there. So that's a case where, practically speaking, the developer building owner can implement, but they can't implement because for all the tenants, because many of the tenants will say, we don't want that.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to just follow up a little bit on that. So the developer can implement the infrastructure necessary for unbundled parking, whatever. But the tenant has to actually implement the charge to their tenants. And you're saying they would be unwilling to do so, but as I'm seeing it, the net cost to the tenants is the same either way. It's just being distributed differently, meaning that someone who requires parking is going to pay a little higher rent, and somebody who's going to not require parking is going to pay a little lower rent. So I'm not quite understanding why for the tenant this is really a negative. It just simply means they're going to have to shift their rents depending upon whether, and I may not be quite using the right terms here, but depending upon whether that tenant requires parking or not. But the net income to the person operating the building seems like it's going to be about the same. Am I mistaken in that?
I think you're partway correct on this, Commissioner Fernandez, but another part that I think I want to highlight. So it is true in existing office buildings in downtown right now, some of the tenants insist on having parking included in their lease. And so they pay a higher rate because there's no parking revenue coming in for those employees of those particular tenants. And then other tenants don't insist on that. And so they get a lower rate because their employees are having to pay to park if they want to park there at the building. The reason why commercial tenants frequently refuse unbundling parking is because their employees don't want to pay the parking. Their employees will be unhappy. Their employees will cease to be their employees. They'll quit. And so employers right now are in a tremendous battle for talent. The competition for employees is fierce right now. And so commercial tenants in buildings don't want to risk losing their employees by having parking unbundled and force the employees to pay for it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fernandez. Did you have any further questions right now?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, this is a real complex issue here. And I think we've had some excellent speakers. And Kathy O'Donnell started talking about state and federal lease contracts, and they're kind of locked in. And I guess I know that 3 minutes is our requirement here, but some of this discussion, I think, merits more just response than just the 3 minutes. So I'd like to hear additional comments from Kathy O'Donnell, especially with what she was just getting at with the state and federal leases and how that would be impacted by these new regulations.
Kathy?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to share some more information. You know, we work with the GSA on federal leases, which the city of Madison, we have lots of various tenants through GSA leases. GSA lease language is locked in by the federal government, and you really cannot make adjustments to that. You could try to request an alteration to say they have very specific language in there as far as what is included as, we call them common area maintenance costs or operating expenses that you can charge the tenant for. They have very exclusive language in there on not having to help cover the cost of any changes in policy, zoning, ADA, changes in building structure. They're very structured leases. So you have to really wrap your head around what's the financial cost of this and what can we agree to. So in an existing building, if we were to move a GSA, let's say USDA wanted to move a 20,000 square foot tenant into one of our buildings, I couldn't request anything of them, even if they were willing to personally on, face to face in Madison. I couldn't request anything of them in a lease that would force them to partake as like, we're going to unbundle parking. That was part of the conversation that was just being had. And your individual drivers or your individual employees would need to pay this rate. They would never allow that. Another one would be providing free bus passes. The GSA leases, government will not allow for those. They won't allow for participating in additional programs of that nature. If we wanted to provide them, I've gotten kickback, some rebuttal from local government tenants that they can't provide one thing to one person and not, similar to another. There's even discussion on EV charging stations. It can't be free because we're not buying gas. There's a lot going on out here with how tenants are using their new space and what these leases require. University leases are similar. It has very strong language in those, even though the UW has a program on campus to cover TDM, and they've got a strong program that they're working, and they've got lots of services over there, Zipcar, everything. Their lease language when they're outside of campus and writing a lease with a regular private building owner, the lease language is directed by the UW, and it has strict language in there that you can't charge for certain changes in law and zoning and ADA, similar to government leases. Our private leases with tenants and national tenants that want to, they have specific language they want in there. And every proposal, starting about 2 years ago, we started seeing every proposal we got has language in there that they do not want their client to be responsible for the cost of implementing any of these types of programs. And their HR department won't share information, so we could work with their staff to try to implement some. So there are some restrictions that we just won't be able to get past to get that real involvement from people to partake in this. So we're trying to find the ones that, how can we encourage them to do this and take the bus and use other means of transportation. But we, if I can't obligate our owners to, yep, I can get this point unless I know for sure I can get it. And with these types of leases and tenants, you can't put that in there.
Okay.
So,
okay. Thank you, Kathy, for your further explanation on that.
mhm.
Did you have anything further, Commissioner Cantrell?
That's all I have right now. I have some other thoughts, but you can go to other questioners right now.
Okay, very good. Are there further questions for any of our registrants? Further questions for any of our registrants? Commissioner Cantrell.
This is a question for Bill Connors. In your memorandum to the Plan Commission, you were talking about unbundling parking and having added a provision that says parking in a surface parking lot for residential units and visitors is exempt from leasing or selling parking separately, as long as the majority of the parking spaces for residential units are in the parking structure and are leased or sold separately. Can you elaborate on that one?
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. I certainly can. So it's very typical for a new apartment building out at the periphery of the city to have a combination of underground and surface parking. It's just simply too expensive to put all the parking underground. Sometimes in those combination parking situations, sometimes all the parking, there's no charge to it. Sometimes the building owner will charge, if a unit wants 2 underground parking spaces instead of 1, they'll charge them for the 1 extra one, but not for the first one. And then some of the building owners charge for all the spots in the underground parking garage. And that's what I was assuming unbundled parking meant in this context, was charge for all those underground parking spots. But when I talked to Philip, he said, no, it's not just to do unbundled parking in a new apartment building out at the periphery. You have to charge for all the parking spaces for the reasons he said. But it's just not practical to charge for those surface parking spaces. There's no gate on the surface parking lots. If you try to do hang tags or stickers, who's going to go out and enforce? Who's going to check on a daily basis to make sure that all those cars in the surface parking lot have paid for their sticker or hang tag? And then you've got issues with deliveries and with visitors. If you find unauthorized vehicles in your surface parking lot, you got to call the police and get it ticketed so you can get it towed. There's way too much involved for the vast majority of apartment building owners to be able to take on charging for surface parking. And even if they tried to do it, even if some of them tried to do it, the response of the tenants would be not to pay the parking and not to take transit. How are you going to do transit in much of the periphery of the city anyways? But what they would do is they would park on the city streets in the surrounding neighborhood. That's how they would respond. So I'm just pointing out that unbundled parking, you take that off the board. You'll have to take that off the board because it very rarely, if ever, will be used in those new apartment buildings in the periphery. And if you take that 10 points away, it becomes very hard to come up with enough points to meet the TDM requirement.
Okay. Thank you for further explaining that. Thank you, Bill. And that's all I have for now.
Okay, thank you. Are there further questions of any of our registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask Philip 2 questions, kind of general in a sense. One, what support have you heard for, once again, the TD up to this point? And then second, just as it relates to, I guess, a lot of this discussion is focused on downtown. do you have any, I don't know if you have any access to survey data or anything, why do developers want to be downtown? Why do businesses want to locate downtown? Do you, if you have any, again, information that might sort of shine a light on that? So, yeah, letters of support, and why do you think, again, folks want to be located downtown, and again with the possible, once again, TDM coming on board?
So I would think either Philip or Tom would want to answer that. Could one of you raise your hand and let me know who's going to take that? Philip.
You want to take it, Tom? You can. Otherwise, I'm happy to as well. Either way.
Why don't you start? And then
Sure.
I'll.
In terms of specific letters of support, I don't know that we've received any. Tom, are you aware if we've received letters of support specifically from the development community?
We've received letters of support from other advocacy groups like Thousand Friends of Wisconsin, and we've gotten some commitments that there will be other letters of support as this goes through the BCCs.
In terms of why businesses locate downtown, there are a variety of reasons. Some of them are due to the vibrancy of the downtown environment. In terms of specific studies, I don't have any at my fingertips right now, but there are a number of reasons that an owner might decide to locate in the downtown. The transportation options that are available, how centrally located it is, the other amenities located relative to downtown. So it is just the unique environment within the county generally, as opposed to other locations in the periphery and things of that nature.
Okay. It might be helpful to get some of that information, quite honestly, because there will be an avalanche of issues in terms of why TDM will be harmful to business and other interests in that development and that sort. It might be good to get some information in terms of, again, what might counter that or what might, once again, mitigate some of those, possible, once again, the pushback to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shepard. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions to start, but while it's fresh in our minds, I thought I'd ask Philip or Tom about the comments that we just heard from Smart Growth about more suburban style parking lots that may have a structured parking component, and the fact that people will just refuse to pay. How do they monitor those? Is that done by a TDM coordinator, and will they just flood the neighboring streets rather than pay?
Yeah, Philip, why don't you answer that, and then I'll give an experience-based answer. Okay.
Sounds good. I was just going to say that not every measure is going to be applicable in every environment. So unbundling parking just simply might not be the most appropriate measure for that suburban apartment complex. Again, it's one of 42 measures. And if there was a desire to have a blended measure like that, where it's unbundled in the garage and then there is a small surface lot available, that is certainly an option. Every developer has the ability to submit their own unique measure that they've created. We wanted to make sure that flexibility is in there so that we don't miss out on things that are innovative and creative and totally unique and offer an opportunity to add to the program in the future. But as far as the unbundled parking measure goes, providing free surface parking would basically blunt the efficacy of unbundling parking generally. It might mean that people end up parking on the streets, but that ultimately that would be in the suburban context, probably just not the right measure for that particular apartment building. And that's something that we've relayed as well.
So for about 25 years, I worked at an engineering firm that had supported by a surface parking lot. And we had to have stickers on our windows, and it was just a thing that we have for that. Now that engineer actually happened to have a pretty good TDM, and that they had showers and lockers and lots of other things. But when an employer provides a $20,000 surface parking space, they're subsidizing a mode of travel, and we're asking, well, if you're going to subsidize that mode of travel, can you provide these other options just to even it out? Cyclists. So in that instance, they could provide a $30 transportation allowance, and people that want to park in the lot, they pay the $30, and people that don't, they take the $30 and they use it towards a bus pass. It's pretty easy thing to do. At one point I was a landlord and I wanted to unbundle my parking. And so I decreased my rents by $50 and I charged $50 for parking. I got the same amount of money every year, but I wanted people to understand that parking is not free. You know what I mean? That there's a cost associated with it. And so it just helps us to even the support we have for all of the modes, if you know what I mean.
Okay, thank you. Second question, I'm actually going to ask three, sorry. Second question is easy. Can you remind us of the threshold for residential only buildings for which this program would apply? I know you mentioned the commercial threshold and one other one.
Yeah, it's 11. So an 11 unit building would be subject to TDM requirements.
Okay, thanks. Okay, then my last question, which is a little more complex, it's about the use and subuse points that came up. At first I was thinking about uses in a zoning sense, but you seem to have your own classification scheme for sub-uses and uses. Is that something that came from other cities? How did you develop that list of uses?
This is actually from the parking code. So we took the use category. So we wanted to codify the existing parking code within the TDM program, just in case anything changes. And let's say parking minimums were eliminated, the TDM program could still operate. So in that way, we've taken the uses and sub-uses from there. And again, to reiterate, if a use were to go from one use to another, or from one sub-use and stay in that use but still turn over, so an office user to an office user, that would not be brought into the program. So the sub-use changes, as long as the sub-use stays the same, which many times they do, the property would not be brought into the program.
So I think maybe there was reference to this, something like it's a coffee shop and then it becomes a bar. That's an example of a different sub-use, correct?
That's correct. That's actually outlined in there's a whole list of sub-uses under commercial, and bar and restaurant are that's one use, and coffee shop is another use.
Okay. All right. I'll have to take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair Zellers. So forgive me, but I want to make sure that I understand unbundled parking. Unbundled parking takes place when an employer charges employees for parking, and when a tenant of a residential unit is required to pay separately for parking, and also when a customer of a large box retailer also has to pay to park at that retail. So make it clear to me what actually fulfills unbundled parking. Is it an act by an employer? Is it an act by a leasing agent? Who?
Unbundling parking would happen at the time of lease. So if the landlord wanted to, if the parking were severed from the leasing of the property itself, so you could lease the property with the parking separately, that would be considered unbundled.
Well, let me back up. I'm sorry not to interrupt, but I'm picturing one type of lease when you're leasing to an individual who is living there. And there's a completely different type of lease when you're leasing to an employer. And we have both of those are versions of unbundled parking. So make it clear when you're saying when we lease to a resident, they have to have a different price for the unit with and without parking. If we're leasing to an employer, what's the requirement?
I think that it's basically the same thing. If you were renting an apartment and you were a tenant, a prospective tenant, and you didn't want to rent a parking stall, you would get a lower rate for rent. But if
Okay.
you wanted a parking stall, you could pay for that individually.
Mhm.
So let's say the rent is $1,000 for a
Mhm.
1 bedroom, and you want a parking stall, and that's another $100 a month. It would give
Right.
you the option to not pay that extra 100 if you didn't want to. But if you wanted the parking stall, you could pay the extra $100 a month. On the commercial side, it would allow a prospective commercial tenant to rent an office space without parking, if they wanted to. If they wanted to still provide a transportation benefit to their employees, they could decide to give their employees enough money to lease a stall directly from the owner themselves if they wanted to. It would not be something that would be a guaranteed benefit. They could also take that money and get a bus pass, or service their bicycle, whatever they want to do. So it's the same concept in different scales.
But okay, let me ask a follow-up question then. If the tenant is an employer, and let's say they say, yes, I want this much office space and I want 40 parking spaces, right? So they lease for those separately, but they turn around to their employees and say, we've leased you your 40 parking spaces, right? So now this fails to function as an incentive any longer, because each individual employee doesn't get a different deal whether they have a parking place or not. Does that make sense? We've lost the incentive value because the employer and leaser has said, yes, I'm going to lease 40 spaces for my employees, but I'm not going to pass on any particular thing to my employees to incentivize them to either use or not use that space. Am I correct in that, or would this also require the employer to further pass an incentive on to his employees, his or her employees, to not use a parking space? That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And no, that would not be a requirement necessarily. So the employer could decide to rent those stalls themselves. It's unbundled. And if they decided to rent those stalls themselves, that would be something that they would be able to do
Right.
with the unbundled parking measure.
So it's unbundled at the point that the employer leases from the developer, regardless of what the employer tenant chooses to then pass on with regard to incentives. Okay, I think that's clear in my mind. The other question that I have is, okay, and again, I apologize if I should really know the answer to this, but you say the properties are already subject to TDM requirements. This is clarifying those requirements. What is the point of enforcement? The slide that said, for example, a conditional use says an employer or a developer is strongly encouraged, blah, blah, blah. Is it still going to be strongly encouraged? In other words, we really don't have a teeth in this with regard to a conditional use. Is that right? No, we've not added more teeth to this. We've just added clarity about what it is that we're expecting. Am I correct?
Not exactly. So this would provide clarity. Right now, as it currently sits, not every project would be brought into the TDM program. This would clarify that and set some very clear parameters. In terms of teeth, I mean, there is a fine that could be associated with the TDM program that's in the ordinance if it were if TDM were not implemented. So there are teeth behind the ordinance itself. Obviously, we would hope that it would never go there, but yes, there are teeth now.
I think I'm asking with respect to plan commission actions. Even if a employer would be, or a developer at any level would be subject to this, but if all they're requesting is a conditional use, that requirement would not be mandatory.
I see that Heather has her hand raised. Heather, could you chime in here, please?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Zellers. I think it's important to just back up a little bit here and recognize that really what this ordinance would do would be to fully replace any future plan commission consideration of transportation demand management choices or metrics. It's its own section in the zoning code to be managed by our Department of Transportation staff. And really the plan commission as a body would no longer see those discretionary measures. You'd no longer really help to shape an applicant's transportation demand management program. Instead, a developer or property owner would actually choose from that menu, meet the points, and they'd go into it with that sort of predictability of knowing, well, I have all these choices, I have to meet these points. I'm not going to be subject to a discretionary review by the city's plan commission or common council. I know the menu that I have to choose from here. And so I hope that clarifies it, that really, we're as a city, we would be removing the plan commission from future consideration of helping to shape TDM.
Thank you, Heather. And I
Thank
see that our zoning administrator, Katie Bannon, has her hand up. Katie, did you have something to add to help clarify?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks. I just want to clarify, it will no longer be in our zoning code. So instead, when certain things happen, it will be like when we have the fire department review for fire code on a site plan review, or traffic engineering review for a site that has traffic engineering requirements. So it'd be transportation staff managing this program and not located in the zoning code.
Thank you, Katie. Did you have any follow-up, Commissioner Fernandez, or additional questions?
No, thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Cantrell.
Thank you. Staff, you've done an excellent job on this, and it's very complex. I'm really familiar with zoning and those regulations, but this is really complex for me to get my hands around. And I know that we've reviewed we have had a couple study sessions on it, but still having just this in discussion in an hour and having the reports, it's a lot to take in and it's a lot to absorb. I guess my question is, one of the speakers talked about timing of appeal and the need to potentially act quickly, and that staff and or appeal to the transportation committee or whatever the process you have included here may not work for some types of leases and agreements. So I guess I'd like to have staff talk about that, and also the word impossible, I think, is problematic. Maybe impractical is a better word, but I think that if the word in here is impossible, I think it will be impossible to ever satisfy an appeal. So if you could talk about that, and I have a couple other questions.
Yes, I agree. I think that impossible, might have been a bit too strong of language. I think infeasible might have been a better word to use in that particular instance. The goal is not to make it impossible to actually receive a reduction. In fact, in the cases of a property where things need to move fast, we would hope that most of this could be accomplished at the staff level. I think it's important to acknowledge that in many cases, when it would be infeasible to meet requirements, it's generally 2 or 3 points in our different tests of different properties around the community, and it's due to space constraints or existing parking that's already constructed, and the only way to actually meet requirements would be to decommission parking. So that's kind of the situation where it becomes infeasible. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so change that word impossible, please. That should be one of the things on your list here. Another question I had: how is the percentage determined I understand the downtown core would be 100%, but then on the BRT it was 80, and then it went down to 65. But could you explain why the 80 was 80 and why 65 was the peripheral was 65 rather than 50? Or so how did staff come up with those percentages and why? I know why, but how?
Basically testing projects and working with the development community. So testing numerous projects on the periphery, seeing what was actually feasible at certain percentages. That was the primary method there. There's not I don't think that's a magic number, 65%. It's just the number where you still get a number of where it's still possible to meet requirements. You still have to do something that would have a meaningful impact, but it's still possible to achieve.
So you took some of our current projects that we've approved and applied the criteria and the points, and you felt that on the periphery 65% was about the right percentage. Okay. Well, that sounds appropriate. Let's see. I have another question here. With the criteria on bus passes, what happens when a company says, yes, I want the points for bus passes, but 60% of their employees live in the city and could actually use a bus pass, and 40% of their employees live outside the community, have no access to transit, and don't really want a bus pass. How does something like that work? Do they still get the points, or do you? But how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way the bus passes work is it would be offering them to the employees. And the way that bus passes work through Metro is every trip ends up being, if you were to provide a monthly bus pass to an employee, the employer would be charged $1.40 per trip up to $65. So for the employees that take advantage of that, they'd be charged $1.40 per trip up to $65. But it would just be offering it to every employee.
Okay, so some employees would get, if they use the bus, they would get the benefit, and other employees would have some compensation based on that they don't use the bus, and they would get some benefit off of it.
They would have their parking stall or a bike rack or something. I mean, that's really within the employer's purview. It would just be offering the transit pass as a benefit. That would be what we would be looking for to get the points there. They wouldn't have to offset that or balance it out in any other way. That would be in their court.
Okay. What about the situation that the one speaker raised about federal and some the GSI have specific lease language that some of these requirements really would be very difficult to make them comply with. So how does this work with something like that?
I think that there are two things to consider there. Number one is Arlington, Virginia is one of the programs that we looked at.
Okay.
Arlington County, Virginia, and that has one of the largest federal employee bases in the country. So they should be familiar with TDM requirements. The other thing is that for existing offices, if an office were to go from one office to another, they wouldn't be subject to TDM requirements. So if it were a retail store converting to an office, they would be subject to TDM requirements, or an office going to something else. But for an office to an office, so let's say they're renting out to an employer in the community, just a regular employer, and then the federal government comes in to rent a space. That's still an office space to an office space, and they wouldn't be brought into the program.
Okay, so those would be existing uses. Okay,
correct, and that's not a change of subuse or use.
Okay, thank you for those answers. That's all I have for right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Alder Paulson.
Sure, though I see Tom has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. Tom, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to help clarify on the bus pass. I think it's often misconstrued that let's say an employer of 50 employees has to provide 50 bus passes. And they don't. They have to make it as an offer to their employees. And if 3 or 5, let's say 5, use the bus passes, then they only really pay for the 5 bus passes. But that provides a 10% reduction in VMT. And so it's really the incremental choices that we're after. And just a small, out of the 50 trips, you take 5 of them away and they're on a bus. And it's a relatively modest expense for the employer to provide that benefit, but it moves us in the direction we want to go. Thank you for allowing me to clarify that.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, back to Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I have a real quick question just on timing. We've approved a lot of projects that haven't started construction in a lot of places. If this ordinance goes into effect in 6 months, does that only apply to new projects that are going through the approval process, or how does that actually time out with things that are under construction? There's a number of projects that have been approved like a year ago out in my part of town that are kind of waiting on supply chain and some construction costs to cool off a little bit before they get going on building.
Staff, who wants to take that? Philip?
Yeah, I can take that. So I mean, they're as written, the program would go into effect for any new projects 6 months after approval of the ordinance. So for things that are already in the hopper, that wouldn't be subject to the program requirements.
Thank you. Did you have any further questions, Alder Paulson?
No, Commissioner Cantrell got my big one about some of the GSA stuff. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Alder Heck.
Thank you. Commissioner Cantrell also asked several other questions I was interested in, but I wanted a clarification about the city, state, and federal leases. If it's a new building, and they would be subject to TDM. If there were severe restrictions based on the prospective tenant, would they need to appeal some aspects of TDM? Perhaps, what do you see as a solution in a new structure?
In a new structure, I mean, the appeals process is really designed to apply to existing structures, not the new ones. That said, I mean, that is something that we could certainly look into. I just generally the appeals process was for existing structures, not new ones.
Okay, I'm thinking
I mean, that TDM process already exists for the new structures or the TDM requirements. So we weren't reducing the requirements necessarily on new buildings.
Okay, so I'm thinking of the new WIDA building over on Patterson and Main Street. They probably have some restrictive aspects to their lease with that landlord, so they wouldn't be able to get a reduction of any type, even if they have some restrictions about what they're willing to pay for.
As currently written, no. That process is really for existing buildings.
Okay.
So that said, for a new building, I think the intent would be that the requirements are being met.
Yeah. In many ways.
Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, in many ways, the state, I'm going to say, has been a good partner, right? They've generally they charge for their parking, so much so that their employees don't like it that they charge for employee. They have a van pool program. So I feel like the state has been a good, responsible partner on this. And like the UW portion, I mean, they're literally a national leader in this. They started this 15 years ago and they are a national leader. So I think the state is, I don't anticipate they would be a huge problem. I'm a little bit more unfamiliar with federal leases, and so I don't know how that would work.
Okay, thanks. I guess that's something to think about. I could imagine those types of things could change with time too, depending upon administrations and things even. So it's something to think about. Just a couple of questions about modifications to the TDM program in the future. You mentioned, I think, Philip, that in 6 months there would be a review after it had been in effect 6 months to make sure there were no big problems. And then annual reviews. Was that right?
That's correct. So basically, the first review would be a year after adoption. That would be when that time period would come up. Any modifications to the program could happen at the Transportation Commission. So the requirements, the point requirements, the specific measures are not listed in the ordinance specifically for that reason, so that we could nimbly respond to any changes that are needed to be made at the Transportation Commission level.
Excellent. So that was my question: is would it have to go beyond Transportation Commission? Okay, thanks.
No, the responsibilities of the Transportation Commission are actually modified in ordinance with this particular ordinance.
That's great. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you, Alder Heck. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. And I did miss the workshop that was done for Plan Commission. So I again apologize if I'm ignorant of this. But two things are concerning me. First of all, I heartily support the goals of TDM. Absolutely. And I very much salute the hard work that's gone into this and the thoughtfulness. And I want to make sure that that's really clear, even as I ask a question. But I'm concerned about its applicability. Am I correct that this is only the obligated person is always the owner of the building? This is cannot apply directly to employers, even though we're talking about parking passes and charging for parking. All of this has to be indirectly placed on the employer by the owner of the building. So that's my first is if I'm correct in that, and I'm concerned about that because I'm not sure that an owner really has much leverage to require in a lease that their tenants provide bus passes. Maybe they do, but it's muddying what I would understand as a normal relationship there. But the other thing is, why is this only limited to new buildings, major modifications of buildings? Are we prohibited by law from applying this to existing uses all throughout the city? I mean, it feels so incremental, and it seems to specifically only operate through this new building or major change of tenant use process, when it's really applicable to everyone in the city. Is there just no mechanism by law to apply this to existing employers or existing building owners?
Philip or Tom? Tom, okay, go ahead, please.
Well, I'll start. Back when we were developing the genesis of this, and we were actually working with Eric Sundquist quite a bit on this because he's been reviewed these nationally, right? And there was really kind of two avenues to go down. One was to associate this TDM program with a development review process, or to create a business license process, a licensing process. And the business license process was somewhat foreign. It would be totally new. It would be it would have to apply universally, and it would have to apply like right now. Everyone beginning July 1st, and it just seemed like it was a heavy lift and pretty unfamiliar. Now, the development review process, it's an imperfect process, but at least it's a process, right? And it's something that we're used to implementing or discussing TDM in, right? In fact, and so we thought that we would do that. And so that's it was a fork in the road. Both forks had their challenges, and we chose one that seemed more consistent with what we had been doing over the past 20 years. Okay. It is an incremental change, meaning that, for instance, changes uses that do not change take longer to get into the program, right? And so we could say any change in lease or whatever does that, but that would be rather dramatic and difficult. I think the development community was just had serious problems with that. However, if you think about it, over 10 years, over 10 years, probably most places will be in the program, and that's a win, right? And when we look at successful programs, across the United States, you don't really measure success in 3 or 4 years. You measure success in decades, 1 or 2 or 3 decades. And the most successful one in Arlington County, that's been in existence for 3 decades, and it's been surprisingly successful. And we want to start getting on the road, and that's kind of the direction we went. I'm going to step back, and then Philip, you may have something to add to that.
Philip, do you have anything that you want to add?
Tom said everything I would have said, and he said it more eloquently than I would have. So.
Okay, very good. Did you have anything else, Commissioner Fernandez?
No, I don't. I thank you very much for that answer, Tom. It really clarified for me. In a perfect world, I would like to see this more universally applied to the employers themselves rather than indirectly through the development process. But I understand the rationale, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cantrell.
I just want, I have a couple other questions, but one, Commissioner Paulson asked this. There are several projects that we've approved, and one on West Washington I know is probably not coming forward for maybe 2 years, maybe even more than that. And I know that I don't know the exact timing, but I know in the ordinance, after 1 year or 2 years after the approval, that expires, and that the developers have to come back to us, I believe, for reapproval. And those are the projects that I guess I'm wondering about. What if we've approved a project, but it's been 2 years or more? Will the reapproval of that project, if it's after the ordinance requirement of implementing it, the project, will they have to comply with this? I guess that's a question. I think Heather probably can answer that, or maybe Philip.
Heather.
Sure, I'll take that one. So first, there are a few different sort of sunsets on approvals, but I want to use our most common one, and that's the conditional use approval. Right. So it's good for 1 year, and once you have an approval and 1 year passes, you may seek permission for up to a 2-year extension beyond that. So 3 total years, and that can be done by just a minor alteration at the staff level, the administrative level, with support by the alder. So, we're seeing that more and more. Developers asking for, 24 more months after that 12-month period. I believe there is a change being introduced tomorrow at the council meeting that would extend that 1 year certain period to 2. And so, we're recognizing, given supply chain, given costs and uncertainties, I think the city collectively is realizing we need a little bit more flexibility there. But if a total of 3 years were to go by, that approval would lapse. And yes, it would be like starting over, starting fresh, and you'd be operating then as a property owner or developer under whatever new ordinances had come into play since that first time. And so, right now, if that were to happen, we'd see developments coming in and facing new stormwater ordinances. If this were to be adopted, the same thing would happen after that, after they've exhausted the full amount of time for which they can get an extension.
Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying that, because I knew that there was a time period that reapproval was necessary. So I guess thanks for that answer. I have a couple other questions. One is, one of the speakers talked about a review of the program. I'm not in favor of any type of sunset clause for any ordinance, but I think that it is valuable to have a review of the impact of an ordinance, especially something like this, and the discussion or the point that the speaker made, and it's also in his memorandum. The discussion with the developer, discussion with the employer, tenants, those sorts of things. I think something like that in a 3-year period or whatever the period that staff feels that may be appropriate is a good thing. I think that it would be, and I think valuable for at least for staff and for the Plan Commission and maybe the alders to know as well. So maybe you could respond to that, or just does staff think that's valid, or is it not necessary?
Tom?
Yeah, I think it is valuable. I'm going to say Philip and SSTI and back 2 years ago, Eric, Sundquist looked at the best programs in the nation, and we've tried to pull out the best parts and not do the parts that we didn't think that good. And then we tried to be responsive to the development community. I know they had a lot of comments, but we made 40 changes to this program so that we could make this feasible for them. And there's probably 5 things that we haven't thought about, that all of a sudden will present a hiccup. And so we do have a 6-month review where we can say, is this as burdensome as people say, or is it actually provide more predictability, and is it easier for them? And then we also built in, because this is managed by the Transportation Commission rather than locked into the ordinance, we built in a way so that this could be nimbly modified, not weakened, but we don't want this to be an enforcement oriented code. We want this to be a compliance oriented code.
Right.
We want to move in the direction towards sustainability. And I don't think we have an enforcement mindset. We have a let's start moving there. I'm a traffic engineer for 30 years. I've always said, well, do our roads have enough capacity for the traffic this development is producing? And so that's what I have done for 30 years, and I think it's okay for us to say, can we shift some of those? Can we, we're always worried about the traffic impacts. Can we think about, well, are they providing a different way for a person to get there other than a car? We are not against the car. And this ordinance is not against the car. This ordinance is just saying, let's also provide the other benefits of the other modes too. And maybe only, 5% would use those ones. Well, 5%, that's a measurable impact.
Okay, thank you, Tom, for further explaining that. And there's something in these regulations that is a review of them. And I have great respect for Eric Sundquist, who was the mover and shaker on this. And I know that hopefully he's watching us tonight, but out in California, and having a good time. But I'm glad that you've incorporated that. My last question is, one of the speakers asked about proposed fees. Has staff talked about what the proposed fees would be, or can you discuss that with us a little bit?
Yeah, we had put up a matrix that we had just explored with maybe a year or so ago. There was some discussion on whether or not the fee should graduate with the size of the development or not, right? And one line of thinking was it shouldn't be based on the size, but then another line of thinking, well, if you're a small owner of a small business, why shouldn't you have a smaller fee, right? The fees were all less than $500, maybe less than $400, and they were graduated. The intent would be for this program to be self-sufficient within 4 years. So because as things are brought online, then they have the renewal fee. This would pay for one position. So we are not using this to make money. We are planning on subsidizing the review of this for a couple of years, but within 4 years, we'd like it to be self-sufficient based on the fees.
So this is an annual fee, is that correct?
It would be a biannual fee. We did that because, the development community says, oh, that's another thing. So we would like this. Really, it reduces paperwork on their side, and actually reduces paperwork on our side too. We just do it every 2 years.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Shepherd.
Hi, just something of a follow-up to my question earlier. In the material in our packet, it includes some statements where folks, organizations support you, some question in terms of, once again, the TDM, what it's doing. A theme, though, that runs across it is a question about the success of TDM. And I'm not saying this is sort of the spirit that comes out of some of the supporters and even some of the detractors of TDM, that Madison lacks a sort of a robust regional planning. I think in the letter from the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, where they appear very supportive of TDM, but they do question, or they bring up the question about a possible lack of regional planning. Can you address that in terms of, is that really a concern? Or is it a concern in the short term, and in the long term that will not be a problem?
Tom?
Yeah, I've been in Madison for a while, as have you, right? And I'm going to say that we've probably made more aggressive investments in our transportation system over the last 4 years than we really have in many time, right? We have we've captured federal funding for the bus rapid transit. We're now looking at an RFP for the north-south, the transit network redesign. And so we have made those investments, and this will help ensure that those investments are a success. I'm going to say, as city employees, we get bus passes, and I don't know who made that decision, but that was a very successful decision, right? Because many employees, they don't come down and park in our garages. They use transit, or they use bikes to come down. And it took probably 15 years for that mode shift to occur. But it has occurred, and it's been quite successful. So that's, I guess that's my answer. We don't have light rail, but we have everything short of light rail, and we've aggressively been pursuing those investments.
Okay, so you would push back against a hard criticism of lack of regional planning and that sort, that we have it and we're actually advancing on it.
Yes, and we have to start making the choice to even out the subsidies that we give to all of our transportation modes. And we've been giving subsidies to the automobile, for 50 years. And I am fine with it, because that creates opportunities for people to get to work and get their groceries and get their kids and daycare and all that. And so that is fine. We're just saying, well, if we're going to subsidize one mode, let's subsidize them all. You know what I mean? So that people have real choices. And I think that's good.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any further questions of our staff? Any further questions of staff? Seeing no raised hand, I would like a motion, please. Commissioner Cantrell.
I'm going to make a motion that the Plan Commission support the creating section 16.03, establishing a transportation demand management program, and amending 33.56 Print 5 of the Madison General Ordinance and forward that recommendation and regulations to the City Council with our support.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Fernandez. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I think that there's been a lot of good work on this, and I really think that staff has done an excellent job, and thank Philip and Mr. Lynch and planning staff and transportation staff on this. This is an ordinance that took some time, and the staff has gone out to the development community and they've submitted comments, and I think that they had a lot of good comments, and I think the staff incorporated many of those into the proposed ordinance that we have. I think that after we adopt this, there will be a review process, and probably some changes will be made, and I think that's a good thing. But we do need to support regulations like this. We need to remove cars from the roads as much as possible. We can't keep expanding the capacity of our highways. We have limited resources in that respect, and we need and the environment. This is pro-environment regulations, and it's consistent with all our comprehensive plan regulation, our goals, and that's why I'm recommending it be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, do we need a motion to make a recommendation to change that impossible to impractical? That word, or where?
I think it would be
that?
good to amend the motion to add that recommendation. Are you making that motion, Alder Paulson?
I am happy to make that motion if that is the appropriate motion to make.
Thank you. Is there a second to that?
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Cantrell. Any comments on that motion to amend the base motion? Seeing none, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent on that amendment to the main motion unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, that motion passes unanimously. Back to the main motion. Any other comments about the motion, or shall we come to a vote? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. And I would just say too, a lot of work has gone into this. It has taken quite a while to get to this point. So thank you, plan commissioners, and thank you very much to staff who have worked very hard to get us to this point. So thank you. Back to our agenda. Moving to agenda item 3, 4, and 5, which are related, and we will consider them as one public hearing. Agenda item 3, Legistar 73814, located at 120 through 128 North Orchard Street, 1313 Randall Court, and 1314 Randall Court. 8th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a single-family dwelling, 2-family dwelling, and 3 multi-family dwellings. Agenda item 4, Legistar 73815, same location. Consideration of a conditional use in the traditional residential urban 2 district for a multifamily dwelling with between 37 and 60 units. Consideration of a conditional use in the TRU 2 district for a building exceeding 6 stories and 78 feet in height. And consideration of a conditional use for a parking reduction of more than 20 automobile spaces and 25% or more of the required parking to allow construction of an 8-story, 48-unit apartment building. And agenda item 5, Legistar 74046, approving a certified survey map of property owned by Four Lakes Properties, same location, in the 8th Alder District. We have a presentation which will be given by our staff, Lisa McNabola. I'm never going to get that quite right. Lisa, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so before the commission now are 3 applications related to the redevelopment of 120 to 128 North Orchard Street and 1313 to 1314 Randall Court. And a detailed discussion and recommendation for each application is in the staff report, as well as the addendum prepared before this meeting. And I will be focusing primarily on conditional use standards 9 and 12 as they relate to the design of the proposed building. So these properties are included in the Regent Street South Campus Plan. And that plan includes some general design guidelines for the entire planning area. And some of the ones that were highlighted in that staff report include that the building design should define a base, middle, and top, that the building mass should emphasize the verticality and rhythm of the street enclosure rather than the horizontality of it. And that horizontal changes in different cladding materials should not be coplanar and only occurring at inside corners. So when staff was reviewing the project, we were specifically looking at these design guidelines. And while staff believes that the building mass is consistent with the plan, there were some concerns related to the facade articulation, which consists of multiple materials, colors, and transitions. And staff met with the applicant and noted that the building elevations could be simplified with the combination of minimizing the color palette, reducing the number of material transitions, and applying a more regular pattern of window openings, with the idea that these changes could help better define a base, middle, and top for the building, and also emphasize the verticality and rhythm of the building, which would be more in keeping with those design guidelines. And so for this project, there are 2 sets of revised elevation drawings that are available on Legistar. And the first is dated November 3rd, which were modified to include a more regular pattern of window openings. And it also removed an 8th story trellis feature, which did better emphasize the top of the building. And staff still had some questions as to whether the revised design could be found consistent with standards 9 and 12. And so included a condition in the November 7th staff report, which recommended that the applicant make at least one or more of the following changes. So there were 4, and that includes simplifying the material palette by removing at least one color or material, applying a more regular pattern of window openings that are mirrored on multiple floors, remove or revise the aluminum trellis feature at the 3rd and 8th floors, or de-emphasize the horizontal banding created by the buff brick veneer and wood tone aluminum longboard, or otherwise organize materials to create more prominent vertical articulation. So prior to this meeting, the applicant submitted a second set of revised elevations dated November 15th to address that recommended condition. And this item was referred from the November 7th meeting. So they had the opportunity to submit revised elevations before this one. And we do see that now, like the window openings are mirrored on multiple floors, and they've removed the trellis feature from both the 3rd and 8th floors. And so with, we now have these kind of 3 variations on the design theme. So what was initially submitted, and then now 2 revisions. And so the Plan Commission has the opportunity to kind of review the design progression over time. And at this point, staff just asked that the Plan Commission determine if there's a design revision that meets conditional use approval standards. And if the Plan Commission determines that additional modifications are needed to meet the approval standards, then staff would offer 2 options. So first, the Plan Commission could refer this item to the next Plan Commission meeting with a condition of approval that states that the applicant shall reflect one or more of the following steps or other modifications found to meet the intent of this condition. And that would be to simplify the material palette by removing at least one color or material, or to de-emphasize the horizontal banding created by the buff brick veneer and wood tone aluminum longboard, or otherwise organize materials to create more prominent vertical articulation. And then the second option would be to refer the application to the Urban Design Commission for comments and recommendations, or you could find the conditional use standards met with one of those two design variations. And I'm happy to answer any questions after the public hearing.
Thank you, Lisa. I will open the public hearing. We do have some registrants. The development team, as is allowed in our Plan Commission standards, they have chosen to pool their time, and they can pool up to a maximum of 9 minutes with 3 speakers. So the first registrant of the developer is Jacob Morrison, 841 West Lakeside Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing 4 Lakes properties. Jacob, you have up to 9 minutes if you end up using all of it.
Thank you very much. I'll just say thank you in advance for your time tonight, and I'll try and keep it efficient yet brief. The site plan here shows the combined 5 lots that will be used to create this new project. 3 of them on North Orchard Street and 2 off of Randall Court. You can see in the site plan here that the primary facade is on North Orchard Street, with the building primarily being oriented towards that street, while Randall Court provides access to some surface parking, rear entrance that is handicap accessible, as well as underground parking within the site. If you go to the next slide, please. On the right is the parking garage, which shows the 10 stalls that we have down there. And we do have all the required bike parking by ordinance. I believe it's 91 bike parking stalls. The ground floor of the building takes up the largest volume, and it addresses the Orchard Street with 3 separate walk-ups to 3 separate units, which helps keep it consistent with the neighborhood pattern on the block of walk-up, terraced, and sort of rhythm of that block. The primary entrance into the building is in the top corner there, which is the side closest to the university, and it is student housing, so everything's sort of oriented that way. The building does have amenities such as mailroom, package room, elevator, trash chutes, and there is a leasing office right next to that main entrance. The next slide, please. You can see here on the right-hand side is the second and third floor plans. The first 3 floors of the building are the largest volumes. At the 4th floor, which you can see on the left-hand side there, the building steps back an additional 15 feet, create a thinner building as it rises, and push it back from view. The 3 floors that are larger also are consistent with the volume of the existing predominantly 3-story buildings on the street, while the taller bit that sits in the back is a bit more set back and hidden from it. You go to the next slide, please. So the upper floors, as you can see, they have thinned down and continue up more or less consistently in unit layout to the 8th floor. The next slide. Roof plan. The roof plan only has a penthouse on it, no amenities there. Next slide. This is a rendering of the building on North Orchard Street, standing just north of it, looking towards it. The primary entrance is on the bottom right there on the ground floor. You can see some bike parking next to it. The second and third floors, you can see, are more predominant, but even on the north corner, they do cut back to create a more accentuated entrance into the building. As Lisa pointed out, we've aligned the windows to be more vertical and removed the trellis elements that we had before to kind of simplify the project. Predominantly, there are 2 materials. There are brick, that is the buff colored brick. And on the ground floor, you can see there's a more darker, more red colored brick. The other primary material is metal. There's a metal panel, which you can see on the right-hand side there. That tall vertical piece is an aluminum metal panel. And then there's a long board panel between the windows and the horizontal bits that is a simulated wood grain, but is in fact aluminum. The balconies are all aluminum as well with a darker trim. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is also from North Orchard. This is looking back towards the campus with the Union South being just over to next street. From this vantage point, you can see some of the walk-ups to the units there. There's also an existing 8-foot easement between this building and its neighbor to the left-hand side here in the view that we are maintaining. That gives the neighbor access to their parking in the back. And the next slide. This is the rear view of the building from Randall Court. On the right-hand side at ground level is the entrance into the ground parking, surface parking area, and you can see straight in front in this view is the easement that I just mentioned. Next to the surface parking is a handicap accessible ramp and a rear entrance into the building. And to the left of that is a ramp down into the underground parking. The dark brick that is on the ground floor in the front is also expressed as a vertical element, which is the staircase that links all the floors together. Next slide. And this is a detail of the entrance on the north side of the Orchard Street elevation, which gives a little bit more clearer view of the materials used. And we very much appreciate the comments from planning staff. They've been very helpful in trying to organize and meet the standards that are put forth right now. We do believe that the building meets these standards, and we think it provides a bit of a relief from what might be a too monotonous a building. And I strongly believe that people are desperate for a little bit of variety in the building without going too far. And I don't think we were going too far. Alder Bennett was really helpful in connecting us with the neighborhood association, the College Area Neighborhood Association, who worked with us and created a steering committee, and we gave them some presentations. They had many good questions, and they were kind enough to provide a support letter. And we've gotten very positive response from everybody in the neighborhood who has come to ask questions about it. So with that, I think I will wrap up my presentation and look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Jacob. The next registrant is Matthew Tills, West Lakeside Street, Madison, support wishing to speak, representing Four Lakes property. Matthew, did you have anything to add?
Thank you. No, I think Jake pretty much covered everything that we wanted to speak to, but I will be available to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. And the next registrant is Abby Jones, South Mill Street, Madison, support wishing to speak, representing Four Lakes properties. Abby, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Hello. I have nothing to add unless there are questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And the last registrant wishing to speak is Jerry Poplinski, North Orchard Street, in support. Jerry, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, you're unmuted. Hello, I'm Jerry Poplinski, the president and treasurer of the Delta of Kappa Eta Kappa Housing Corporation, the owner of 114 North Orchard Street, which is lot 9 of Randall Court. I would like to thank the city engineering staff for finding the vehicle and pedestrian agreement that provides an 8-foot wide private right-of-way between Randall Court and Orchard Street. This private right-of-way is not shown correctly on the proposed plan drawings and the proposed CSM. See staff report numbers 70 on page 15 and 69 on page 17. This private right-of-way benefits our property by providing access to the public right-of-way and pedestrian vehicle access via Randall Court. Thank you for your attention on this matter.
Thank you, Jerry. The other registrants, the next one is Kevin Burrow, University Avenue, Middleton, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions, representing Kanothi Bruce. Let's see. Steve Rogensvog, Mills Street, Madison, support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions, representing Four Lakes properties. And that is it in terms of registrants. Are there any questions of any of our registrants? Alder Heck.
Thank you. These are probably for Jake Morrison. I've just got a couple of quick questions. First, can you address what your neighbor had to say about the easement and the way it's not depicted properly? It may be that I can ask staff about this later, but I thought maybe I'd give you the opportunity also.
Yeah, it's my understanding that we have shown the easement correctly according to the way that it's listed in the legal agreement. I certainly know that we would have to and would like to maintain that easement as written, and there's no intention for us to encroach upon it. In fact, the new building is further away from that easement, and there now will be a sidewalk next to it. So while the easement itself, the driveway, won't increase in width, there will be some extra space around it, which might make it a bit more comfortable to drive down.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we can chat about that again later. Another question for you. On the top of the third floor, I think it is, along Orchard, I see you have some patios for individual units. I'm wondering if that's the case, or is this a larger, more public space for all the tenants?
It is not a combined public space. Those spaces are for each individual unit that faces that area, and they don't take up the entire roof on that fourth floor. There are green spaces around it to just try and keep the area a little bit contained so it doesn't become too large of a gathering spot.
Thanks. I ask partially because my work office is on the fourth floor of the building across the street.
Oh.
One other question. I'm interested in the number of bicycle stalls that you've chosen to include, and I'll be asking staff about this too. I'm wondering if it's enough given the low number of car parking stalls, which I think is appropriate, but everybody has a bike down there, and I'm wondering if your justification for including 91 stalls, I think it is, even though you're asking for a parking reduction, I think of 31 stalls, parking stalls.
We're only asking for a parking reduction of 31 car stalls.
Right.
We're not asking for any reduction of bike parking stalls, and we'll be providing the full number of bike parking spots as required by the ordinance.
Yeah, I'm seeing that you'd have 31 fewer parking stalls, but only 17 additional bike stalls. And so I'm wondering, is there any way you can put more in, do you think, to make up for the fact that you're going to have 31 fewer car parking stalls?
Yeah, I think
that makes sense.
I think I understand what you're asking. I see where you're going with that. We can certainly look at trying to add additional stalls above the required ordinance. In any extra storage space we have in the lower level. We do have bike parking on the surface as well, and we might be able to look at adding some more spaces on the surface as well. All the spaces in the basement are protected and in a semi-heated space, which is a more convenient spot, but I do think there might be some opportunity to add some spaces on the surface.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Are there any further questions of any of our registrants? Alder Paulson.
Yeah, just real quick on the trellis design. And I know that we've been kind of backing off from that, but I'm just curious if we found that the conditions were all met even with the trellis design, is that even still on the table for you, or have we kind of moved on from that? And I'm not necessarily suggesting that that's where the plan commission is going to go, but
yeah, it's certainly possible to put it back in if you feel it's a more appropriate look. We'd certainly welcome it, but at the same time, like I said before, we're happy to respond to the planning staff's comments, and not having it, I don't think, makes the building less attractive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Any other questions? I see no raised hands, so I'll close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I wanted to ask some real specific design questions, and we don't oftentimes get a chance to muck with design here. We usually do this for our friends in UDC, but I wanted to ask very specific. I have two questions. First off, when is the Regent Street South Campus plan? When was that last revised?
I'm not sure about amendments, but it was adopted in 2008.
Okay.
Heather, does that sound right?
Yeah, I don't think it has been amended. Since then, we've adopted some other, the campus master plan and the downtown plan, which are right next to it, if not overlapping, but it hasn't been amended.
Okay, but it's not a like 1978 plan that we haven't gotten around to. It's much more modern. I mean, though 2008 at this point is only some of us think that's not too long ago. So,
yeah.
Okay, then the specific question I had was on could you just help me understand, again, I'm not an architect, the third bullet, the horizontal changes in different cladding materials shall not be coplanar, only occurring at inside corners. Is the concern here that the different cladding materials are in fact coplanar, as in they line up next to each other? Can you just help me understand that standard?
Yeah, so I think that as with all things, there can still be room for interpretation, and especially perhaps how like an architect might define coplanar. But usually I think we expect to see at least some type of relief between the two materials, but sometimes it will even be like quite a feet of step back. So you could see like a few feet difference in the facade and you could see a material change there. Or I think in some cases we've seen it of just, 6 inches or so in a difference in material. That's how I have read it. Heather, if you feel that could be interpreted differently. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Did you have other questions, Alder Paulson, or follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I just want to follow through on my discussion about bike parking. I perhaps you understood where I was going, and that there was a 31 car stall reduction, but only 17 additional bike stalls above requirements. Is it unusual that would be the case, especially in this neighborhood? Do you think? Is there? I certainly the applicant expressed some willingness to explore more bicycle stalls, but do you see any way that we should put that in a condition of approval, or is it too squishy at this time?
Yeah, Heather could probably speak to maybe what we've seen at other developments. Heather, if you wanted to say.
Heather, did you want to chime in on this one? Heather, you've got to unmute.
I think I'd learned that by now. So they've added about, I think it's 17 bike stalls over and above what the code requires. They could add, they could add 30 more and better approximate the total number of bedrooms on the property. But I think, in this type of location, there are so many options. There's biking, there's walking, will I think be a very frequent mode of transportation, the bus as well. I can't think of a lot of cases where we as a city, as a plan commission, have expected that they'll make up for lost automobile stalls by providing kind of a one-to-one bike stall in replacement for it. I think there are some examples in some of the larger student housing projects where they've even actually provided less bike parking than what was required. But they've also provided some in-unit bike parking storage spaces that don't meet zoning requirements, but certainly meet a practical need for additional bike storage. I guess my advice at this point would be, hey, acknowledge they're over what's what's required right now with regard to the requirements for the space that bike stalls take up at this point, and acknowledge that there are different transportation options here. I don't have any concerns with the automobile reduction at all in this location. So those are just some thoughts. I think it would be in bounds if the Plan Commission decided that they wanted to see additional bike parking, but I don't think there's a strong precedent for it. And I think they're in pretty good shape here, honestly.
Thanks. Perhaps I could just suggest that we add a condition that would encourage more bike parking, and that can be what it may be. I'll also recognize that there are hundreds of bike parking stalls just across the street at Union South, but I'm sure UW would not like residents of this building to be taking up their bike parking stalls 24/7. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Anything further? No. Okay, Commissioner Shepherd.
Yeah, just a quick question. I am not clear on this, but in the applicant's letter of intent, they mentioned that they have a management plan. Is that something we can ask for or put in the record? How do we handle management plans any longer? And if we do, what do we do with that? Again, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was very good that the applicant mentioned that they have a management plan. We didn't have to ask for it. But what do we do at this point?
Lisa or Heather, who wants to take that?
I'm just really not clear about that. So.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't know if I have an answer to that question.
Heather, can you take that?
Yeah, I was looking at the report to see if zoning had any specific comments about a management plan. So what we've been trying to do in working with our colleagues in zoning is really standardizing what's expected of management plans when they're required. And usually that's for larger buildings. I think this one would be, fine, great to have a management plan for. But our zoning colleagues have really wanted to start to see those more standardized. And let me just glance through and see if there's a comment from zoning regarding a management plan.
I don't see one, Heather, in the staff report.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yep. I don't either. So they are voluntarily offering to provide one.
Right. Yeah. It was in there, I think in their letter of intent where they mentioned that, which I thought was good. I didn't know, so if they're just going to offer it, what do we do with that? So if we do anything with it, maybe we just say, thanks a lot, leave it there. So.
Yeah, I think ultimately it would be maintained in the record with the conditional use materials when they come in for sign off. And it's really instructive for things like move in, move out, and elements like that. But I think that in this case, it didn't meet the threshold that our zoning colleagues wanted to formally require one.
Yeah, and the only other reason I'm asking that is because it looked like they did a good job in terms of working with the alder and working with the neighborhood organization and that sort of thing. So from my perspective, if they're going to offer it, let's take it. And also, I think if the neighborhood organization should ask for it later or something along those lines, if we can have that in the record. But it sounds like you're moving in that direction already. So, no, thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing I could suggest is that if commissioners were interested, you could recommend that that staff add the standard condition related to management plans so that is part of the formal record. We would be happy to do that if the commission wanted to see that as part of the formal submittal.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further on questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, do we have a motion? Commissioner Cantrell.
And I assume you want 3 motions in this
Yes.
case? Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, so the first one would be the demolition.
Okay. Well, I'm going to recommend that the Plan Commission find that the standards, let's see, I have the wrong report here, sorry. Approve the standards for demolition permits are met and approve the demolition of 5 residential buildings at 120 to 128 North Orchard Street and 1313 to 1314 Randall Court.
And is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepherd. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner
No,
Cantrell?
Not
Okay.
that one, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, inputs from any of the commissioners? If not, we will come to a vote. And I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion on the demolition permit passes unanimously. And then next we would be looking for a motion on the conditional uses. Commissioner Cantrell.
There's also the certified survey map. Can I do that one next?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I recommend that the Plan Commission find that approval standards of the certified survey map are met and forward the CSM to create 2 lots be forwarded to this Common Council with the recommendation of approval.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
No, thanks.
Okay. Any comments or input in regard to that motion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Now to conditional use and need another motion.
Okay.
Commissioner Cantrell.
I will recommend that the Plan Commission find that the approval standards for conditional use are met and approve the conditional use for multiple family building with between 37 and 60 units, and for a building exceeding 6 stories and 78 feet in height in the traditional residential urban District 2. And to allow an 8-story, 48-unit residential building at 120 to 128 Orchard Street and 1313 to 1314 Randall Court.
Did you mention the parking reduction?
And recommend that the parking reduction to 17 spaces. Is that correct?
Parking reduction of more than 20 automobile spaces and 25% of more of the required parking.
Be approved.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
Yes, and this is a support of the latest elevation that the development team has submitted, that aligns the windows and with the progression of the design. And I think staff pointed out some important design issues for this building. And I think that the design aspect of that was most important to me was aligning the windows, because I think that having a sporadic location of windows is very confusing design. And I think actually removing the trellises improved the design of the building as well, in my opinion. And I'm not as concerned with the deletion of one of the additional materials as staff pointed out. I don't think that's typically would be necessary in this building. I think it is a nicely designed building. It's providing housing exactly where we need it. It's almost like dorms, a dormitory in this location, since it's just right across the street from the university. Yeah, so I think this is a appropriate location, consistent with our plans, and I think the design is also appropriate. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments, input, discussion, Alder Heck.
Thank you. I wanted a clarification to make sure I understood the motion. So Commissioner Cantrell is not recommending that we take that staff addendum recommendation that listed two possible solutions to staff's additional concerns about design, where they gave the choice of one or the other in order to meet criteria.
That's my understanding of Commissioner Cantrell's motion. Commissioner Cantrell, do you want to verify that that's accurate? You're muted, Commissioner Cantrell.
Okay. Well, I guess my motion is in favor of the last design that was presented, and because that design aligns the windows, and if that's of confusing to staff or the Plan Commission, then I guess I'd like staff to further explain what their preference is. But I'm not recommending it be referred to urban design and not recommending it be referred to another meeting. I want the action to occur tonight.
So is that clear to staff and to other commissioners? Lisa?
Yes, that's clear. So, and maybe to clarify for Alder Heck, it's certainly, appropriate or within your purview to approve the conditional use as is with that most recent elevation and not include a motion to include additional modifications as noted in that addendum. So those are provided in case the Plan Commission felt that the conditional use standards 9 and 12 could not be met with that most recent elevation. But if the Plan Commission finds that they are, they could approve it without a condition of further modifications.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question, Alder Heck? Yes. Okay. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I also, and I don't want us to spend a ton of time on design here. I actually really like the trellis. I think the trellis helps. I think the trellis makes the building a little more interesting. And I think looking at the design guidelines from the plan, I think that it's still consistent with most of those things. So I guess I'm not gonna be wedded on it and not willing to die on this hill, certainly. I think fixing the windows helped with getting the verticality, which I think was the main thing that we really wanted to get in the design guidelines. I'm not too worried about the trellis emphasizing more horizontal layouts, and I like what the trellises are doing on the corners. I actually think that that corner where they just wrap around a little bit, I think it actually helps make the vertical bits a little bit better. And I just think it's nice to have a couple of new features on some things and to do some design. That area of, with the exception of Union South, the architecture in that area is pretty 70s and pretty terrible. And I like that the trellis kind of borrows a little bit of ideas from what's going on Union South, just not far up the way. So I would be very happy to see the trellis added back in. I do not want to have a big fight over the trellis here tonight, so I will leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Alder Paulson. Any other discussion, input? Seeing no raised hands, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Next on the agenda is agenda item 12 and 13. 12, Legistar 74258, located at 4409 Flom Road and 2505 Seifert Road, 16th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the Industrial Limited District for a personal indoor storage facility. Agenda item 13, Legistar 74265, approving a certified survey map of property owned by 2501 Stoughton Road, LLC, located at 4409 Flom Road and 2505 Seifert Road, 16th Alder District. And Lisa will be giving us a brief overview. Lisa?
Yep, thank you. So as stated by the chair, this request includes a conditional use for a personal indoor storage facility. So the applicant proposes to construct a 3-story, approximately 101,000 square foot, climate-controlled indoor storage facility with 700 units. And staff does not anticipate that this would preclude any kind of normal or orderly development of other industrial development in the surrounding area, consistent with adopted plans. But this was pulled from the consent agenda because earlier today we had some questions about comments from the forestry section, and we were able to connect with forestry staff, and they provided conditions of approval that were noted in an addendum prepared earlier today. And we just wanted to be available to answer any questions about the comments from forestry if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Or any other questions.
Thank you. And we do have a couple of registrants. I'll open the public hearing. Jason Letha, South Biltmore Lane, Madison, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Representing Dan McCoy. And then also registrant Dan McCoy, Peachtree Road, Atlanta, Georgia, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Are there questions of either of our registrants? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? And I will just interject here. I was the one who had the questions about the forestry not having conditions, and the addendum answers most of my questions, but one that still remained and forestry was not available to contact before our meeting has to do with tree protection, which is usually something that they would include, but wasn't something that they included in that addendum. So I think that Heather or Lisa might have a recommended condition that might be appropriate to add to encourage the applicant on tree protection. Lisa or Heather?
Sure. Yeah, we did put together a condition if Plan Commission would like to recommend it to address the concerns raised by the chair. So it might actually be better to pull it up rather than reading it all. Just give me one moment. Share my screen. So the condition could read that the Plan Commission provides an advisory comment that the development team consider the standard forestry section conditions of approval related to the preservation and protection of existing street trees as follows, subject to input from the city forester. And here we have copy and pasted 5 of the standard conditions that are typically included by the forestry section related to the preservation and protection of existing trees. Will not.
Very good. Thank you, Lisa and Heather. for pulling that together. Are there any other questions of staff? Commissioner Cantrell.
I briefly reviewed this report because it was on consent, and I briefly looked at the site plan. But as I remember, this is a very wooded site. Is that correct? Okay, that's what I remember. And they're proposing a fairly large building. Is that, and that's correct. So obviously, they're going to have to take out trees to put the footprint of the building in. But so what this recommendation would say is that they preserve as many trees as they can by protecting those trees. So when they level the site, and so they don't basically clear cut and just take everything off the site and start from scratch. Is that what we're?
This is basically street trees.
Oh,
Yeah, so it would only be within the right of way.
Oh, in
and
the
then
right of way. Okay.
Subject as well to review from the forestry section to determine like whether
Okay.
or not it's a tree to be preserved.
Yes, perfect conditions. Yes, thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Did you have anything further, Commissioner Cantrell?
No.
Okay. Alder Paulson.
Are there street trees down there? There's no
Yes.
sidewalks on. Wow.
You're still in the right of way. Yeah.
Okay, and then there's city forestry managed trees in that right of way?
Mhm.
Okay.
Any further questions? Then we would be looking for a motion, and it would be two motions again. So the first one is conditional use, or we could have it on the certified survey map first, whichever. Commissioner Cantrell.
I'll do the certified survey map, and I would recommend the staff do that all the time, because that at least allows the mover or the maker of the motion to talk about the aspect of the project last. So, but I'm going to recommend that the Plan Commission find the approval standards for the certified survey map are met, and forward the CSM creating one lot at 2505 Seaford Road and 4409 Flom Road to the Common Council with a favorable recommendation.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. And is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I'll assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. And now the conditional use. Do we have a motion? And hopefully, which will include the additional conditions. Commissioner Cantrell.
I will recommend that the Plan Commission find the approval standards for the conditional use are met and approve the conditional use for a personal indoor storage facility in the Industrial Limited District at 2505 Seaford Road and 4409 Flom Road, with the addition of the recommendations that were presented tonight for the Forestry Department.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Is there further, did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
No.
No. Is there further discussion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I'll assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. The next item is agenda item 22, Legistar 74498, located at 402 West Wilson Street, Fourth Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish an office building. Lisa, I believe that you have an overview for us.
Yes, thank you. So at your July 25th, 2022 meeting, the Plan Commission approved the partial demolition of the two-story office building at 402 West Wilson, which included the demolition of the west street-facing wall, which is what required the demolition permit approval, and with the planned retention of the two walls facing West Wilson Street and South Broome Street. And those walls were to be incorporated into the revised building that was approved concurrently as an amended plan development. And that project was approved, and it's currently in the final sign-off phase. But upon further review by the applicant, it basically determined that the existing foundation wall footings would not support the proposed 4-story building. And they determined that they would have to demolish all walls and basically reconstruct from the ground up. But they do propose to retain and reuse that limestone facade material that was a part of the original building. And they provided a more detailed supplement to salvage the building's existing limestone. And there is a condition in the staff report that outlines the expectation that that limestone will be salvaged and reused. And I can answer any questions.
Okay. And we have one registrant, Nick Orthman, 80th Street, Kenosha, Wisconsin, in support, wishing to speak, representing Bear Development. Nick, you have 3 minutes.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I'm Nick Orthman with Bear Development, 4011 80th Street, Kenosha, Wisconsin. I think Lisa's overview is pretty accurate and a pretty good representation of where we're at. We got into the details of the project, working with the architectural team, the structural team, just kind of realized that the building footings weren't suitable to support what we were looking to build up top. And, also we were concerned about potential waterproofing issues and just some general constructability the further we got into it. So that being said, we wanted to kind of retain the existing limestone and pay ode to the existing building that's still there. So really didn't make any other changes to the development proposal aside from the means and methods for the demolition here. So looking to take the building down as a whole and then salvage the existing limestone and put it back up. We think it's actually kind of pretty. It's a nice kind of patinaed and has a cool look. So we think it'll be a nice feature of the new development. That's really it. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Nick. He's the only registrant. Are there any questions for Nick before I close the public hearing? Alder Paulson.
This may also just be a question for staff, but are there any changes to the plan, or are we going to revisit those plans at all, or?
Nope. So this is just a reconsideration of the demolition permit. I think there, just for the record, have been some modest design progression changes that I think are typical for a project as it moves through the approval process that are typically handled administratively. So like you might see a balcony in a slightly different location when the building is built, but it isn't anything significant at this point where we would return it to Plan Commission.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's get back to questions of our registrants. Are there questions of our registrant? Did you have it?
Well, I've got maybe one more.
Okay.
One of the things that we had a kind of lengthy discussion about was some bicycle parking and bicycle access there, and there was some, I think, limitations from sort of reusing the existing building. I just wondered if that was now for demolishing things, if that's kind of back on the table from the, I'm sorry, Nick, I think.
Yes, Nick.
Yes.
Can you respond to Alder Paulson's question?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to. I do remember that conversation, and I think, excuse me, Lisa can probably help fill in the details here where I might be blanking, but I think we're actually exceeding the bike parking requirement. Got 54 units here. We're doing 60 stalls and then 60 bike parking stalls, that is. And each of the units has a private storage area as well that can fit a bicycle. So I think we should be pretty well in excess of not only the baseline requirement, but also providing some extra space that could be used for bike storage. But
Nick, I think that the last time the question was access to the bike parking and having the standard width size aisle rather than a narrower access aisle.
yeah, I think that there's been a design progression on the interior of the building, and we've actually mitigated those concerns. I hope Lisa's navigating to the plan sheet the same way that I am right now, but I know we did make some changes to that area. And I'm hopeful it's all satisfied here. So I will keep scrolling while we talk and make sure that's the case.
Lisa, do you have a response to Alder Paulson's question off the top?
Yeah, I can't speak to the design progression, but I know part of the request was also the amount of structured parking. So it wasn't necessarily like that they were not providing the number of spaces, but they were doing a structured parking. So like 2 over 2 spaces in excess of what is typically allowed by the code. So usually they try to limit the amount of structured bike parking and prefer to have it all like at grade, basically.
Okay.
So that was part of that request.
I'm looking at our plan sheets right now from the most recent design progression, and we've got all 5 feet drive access aisles for the bike parking. So I think we should be in good shape there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Paulson, for raising that. Are there any further questions of our registrant? Seeing no raised hands, I'll close the public hearing. Are there additional questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, we need a motion. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I'm happy to move approval of the demolition permit.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Cantrell. Alder Paulson, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I think that we get in there and it didn't work out, and that's a bummer, and they can move on. I will just say that I really of all the designs that we've approved since I've been on the commission, yours is definitely the favorite. I hope that it remains as stunning in the revised construction. So good luck, and I hope you are able come up with a great project.
Okay. Thank you, Alder Paulson. Any further comments, discussion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, is there any business by members? Seeing no raised hands, we will go to the secretary's report. Heather.
Thank you, Chair Zellers. We have some really exciting action-packed meetings ahead for the end of 22 and the beginning of 2023. Couple highlights for December 12th, when we reconvene in a normal meeting. We will have transit-oriented development. The ordinance will be introduced tomorrow evening at the council meeting, and so that will be before the Plan Commission on December 12th. In addition, we'll have 2 major items that were referred this evening, the Lake Street Ramp project and also the Roth Street project on the former Hartmeyer site in the area of the Oscar Mayer Special Area Plan. And finally, one of the early developments within the Odana area plan, 6604 Odana Road, a new 87-unit apartment building. Those are some of the highlights. One thing that's not listed in the upcoming matters is an exciting initiative that has also been taken on by our colleagues in the Department of Transportation, and that's the Complete and Green Streets initiative. That will also be introduced at tomorrow's council meeting and before the Plan Commission for an advisory recommendation, not the lead, but it will be before you as well. So a lot of really exciting and complex transportation related initiatives coming here at the end of the year. And then looking forward to January 9th. So we make it into 2023 and our first meeting is very downtown heavy. We'll have a project coming back to the Plan Commission on the 400 block of State Street for an addition for 26 new apartment units. Project at 118 West Wilson Street, the return of the county project to construct an addition to the jail property. And then East Wilson, this is the return of the demolition of St. John's Church for construction of a 10-story mixed-use building under planned development zoning. This is a project that is seeking the city's affordable housing fund support for 130 units in a mixed-use building. And then rounding things out in the downtown area, 131 West Wilson Street, construction of a new 15-story, 263-unit apartment building. So yes, very exciting meetings ahead. And then just wanted to mention the reminder that we will be getting together in person on December 8th at the Madison Municipal Building in the second floor main room, the old courthouse room, room 215. That meeting will be from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and we're excited to see all of you in person. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any questions of Heather? Seeing no raised hands, looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepherd, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And see you on December 12th. Take care.